Welcome to the debate. Today, we are diving into a pretty significant domestic data release from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, or MBEE, regarding New Zealand's energy performance. The headline is striking. The September 2025 quarter saw renewable electricity generation reach a new record high, covering 89.4% of the total national supply.
It is a remarkable achievement. It really does confirm New Zealand's global leadership position in renewable capacity.
Exactly. But this high water mark forces us to ask a really crucial and complex question for future policy. Does this 89.4% figure signify robust, strategic, and sustainable success, confirming the viability of a full energy transition, or is it a vulnerable temporary peak achieved primarily through favorable environmental conditions that might be masking deeper structural fragilities?
That framing is essential, I think, because how you interpret it really dictates future investment.
Right. So I'll be arguing that this data provides conclusive empirical evidence of a successful and diversified energy transition. The system, in my view, demonstrated genuine operational resilience by dramatically reducing reliance on coal and gas, even as national demand hit new heights.
And I'll take the opposing view. While, celebrating the operational success, I'm going to argue that the high percentage figure fundamentally rests upon a single volatile variable, hydrological conditions. And it fails to address the persistent, complex challenge of decarbonizing the non-electricity industrial sectors. The success is, it's currently incomplete and fragile.
Okay, so let's look at the operational triumphs this quarter represents. The system didn't just maintain the status quo, it thrived under pressure. Residential electricity use climbed to 4,511 gigawatt hours, which is the highest quarterly level ever recorded. Yet, renewables covered that historic load. This isn't static success, it's demonstrated resilience and capacity expansion.
The resilience you cite is impressive, yes, but it does need context.
Well, the most important context is what this capacity displaced. Coal generation dropped by a staggering 67.4%, a removal of 596 gigawatt hours. Gas generation fell significantly too, by 22.5% or 284 gigawatt hours. This simultaneous achievement, record demand met by record renewable output, resulting in a dramatic, verifiable fossil fuel displacement, that is the strongest proof we have that the national strategy is working toward a fully renewable electricity system.
Okay, but I come at the figures from a more structural perspective, and I find that line of reasoning a bit vulnerable. I maintain that the impressive 89.4% figure is fundamentally reliant on a factor entirely outside of strategic human control: the weather. We have to be honest about where the bulk of that successful quarter originated.
And where do you see the origin?
Directly in hydro. Hydropower delivered a 22.6% gain this quarter, increasing output by 1,260 gigawatt hours. MBEE was unequivocal in its report. They attributed this enormous increase specifically to far better rainfall and lake storage conditions compared to the preceding dry period. So we're not looking at a stable baseline here. We are looking at a weather-dependent surge that created the margin needed to hit 89.4%.
While the hydrological conditions certainly provided the opportunity, I think minimizing this achievement by calling it a weather anomaly ignores the strategic infrastructure that's in place to capture and utilize that rainfall. And furthermore, it ignores the diversification efforts that acted as a hedge.
I can see that geothermal is an important hedge, but let's just, quantify that hedge relative to the risk.
Okay, geothermal, which offers stable baseload power regardless of rainfall variability, rose by 6.5%. adding 156 gigawatt hours. This was supported by the commissioning of new capacity at Te Huka Unit 3. This investment strengthens New Zealand's unique position as a global leader in utilizing baseload geothermal energy, actively insulating the generation portfolio from the exact hydrodependency you highlight. And we also saw solar generation surge by 64.2%, adding 83 gigawatt hours. This is an explicit diversification strategy in action.
That's a necessary strategic development, yes, but I still believe that interpretation minimizes the scale of the volatility we're discussing. When we put those figures side by side, the diversification story immediately shifts back toward vulnerability.
How can you look at a 64.2% jump in solar and a 6.5% jump in stable geothermal and not call that a meaningful step in diversification?
Because the 1,260 gigawatt hour increase from hydro is an order of magnitude larger than the combined 239 gigawatt hours of solar and geothermal increase you just cited. The hydro increase alone is over 5 times the gain from your combined diversified sources. So if that massive hydro surge is just a weather-driven bounce back, which the report strongly suggests, then the stability of the 89.4% figure is highly susceptible to the next inevitable dry spell. The structural challenge of managing hydrological risk, which demands massive storage and backup capacity, hasn't fundamentally changed. It's just been temporarily masked by excellent rainfall.
That line of reasoning, however, focuses only on the input side, the source of the gigawatt hours, and not the consequence. The crucial strategic success this quarter confirms is the effective decoupling of demand growth from fossil fuel use, regardless of the input mechanism.
Decoupling is the ultimate goal, agreed, but the mechanism matters when it affects long-term investment viability.
Well, the evidence for successful decoupling is undeniable. The dramatic 67.4% reduction in coal use and the 22.5% drop in gas use occurred simultaneously with the highest residential demand ever recorded. The operational capacity was there, and it was utilized to displace high-carbon generation. This directly supports the MBIE claim that renewables are, and I quote, increasingly meeting national demand without relying heavily on coal and gas. If the system was truly fragile, that demand spike would have necessitated turning up thermal generation. It did not.
I fully respect the numbers proving that successful displacement within the electricity grid, but we must expand the scope of what we define as energy stability. Have you fully considered the necessary interventions that were required for system management that complicate this supposed robustness?
I'm focusing on electricity generation capacity, which is the primary metric of the 89.4% figure. What intervention specifically are you targeting?
I'm referring to the management of industrial demand, which reveals a structural difficulty in truly eliminating fossil fuel reliance across the entire economy.
The source material noted that Methanex, a major gas consumer, had to pause production from mid-May to early July explicitly to free up gas for electricity generation.
But that pause occurred primarily outside the September quarter, mitigating its direct impact on this specific metric. Right, but even if the impact was minimal on the reported figures, the very necessity of mandating strategic shutdowns like the one Methanex undertook highlights a structural constraint. It shows that when system constraints do appear, be they regulatory, supply, or environmental, the mechanism for balancing the grid still requires flexing industrial demand and redirecting fossil fuels. That is not a sign of fully robust, self-sufficient decoupling. It's an acknowledgement that the system still relies on flexible fossil fuel capacity as the ultimate buffer against supply fluctuations.
I think you're confusing advanced load management with systemic fragility. Optimizing resource allocation, moving gas from industrial chemicals to electricity generation during peak constraint periods is a sign of sophisticated regulatory control ensuring high-priority services are met, not a failure of the renewable strategy. The strategy aims to displace fossil fuels, and in the September quarter, it succeeded comprehensively within the generation sector.
Sophisticated control is needed because the non-power sectors, which often require fossil fuels for high heat processes or chemical feedstock, are being marginalized to protect the electricity headline figure. And furthermore, the report shows that gas use in the chemical sector actually increased slightly compared to the year prior, demonstrating that deep decarbonization across all industrial processes remains a significant unanswered challenge. This suggests the transition is fragmented.
Fragmentation is an interesting concept, and it leads us to the final point we must address regarding national energy security. If we accept the premise that the transition is currently fragmented, successful in electricity but exposed elsewhere, how does the quarter's overall energy environment factor into the assessment of stability?
It confirms the exposure.
I would argue it provided a crucial complementary cushion. We should acknowledge the parallel relief seen by consumers in the transport sector during this period. Petrol prices dropped 4.43%, and diesel dropped 5.90% year-on-year. Now, while this is global driven by 8 OPEC plus countries gradually increasing oil production,
MBI noted that these improved global supply conditions directly moderated fuel prices for New Zealand households.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because relying on external factors like OPEC Plus decisions to provide domestic stability is the very definition of security vulnerability. The success you're citing is purely geopolitical leverage, not strategic domestic planning.
But domestic energy policy isn't developed in a vacuum. If the domestic strategy effectively isolates the electricity grid from global fossil fuel volatility, and coincidentally, geopolitical conditions stabilize prices in the highly exposed transport sector, then the overall net effect on the New Zealand consumer and the national economy is one of heightened stability during that period. It suggests we can manage the composite energy challenge.
It suggests we got lucky. The fact that a large portion of New Zealand's energy stability is still dictated by external decisions, whether it's OPEC's willingness to pump more oil or global geopolitical stability, that underscores the exact fragmentation I am concerned about. The domestic electricity grid success shouldn't distract from the international risk exposure inherent in a transport sector that remains almost entirely dependent on these volatile global oil decisions. True energy security must be self-reliant, not reliant on favorable international market interventions.
I'll concede that the transition in the transport and industrial heat sectors lags behind the electricity grid, and that presents ongoing challenges. However, based strictly on the core metric this quarter sought to report, electricity generation, the evidence for a strategic, successful step forward is compelling.
A successful step forward that was overwhelmingly facilitated by weather.
Achieved by utilizing diversified renewable capacity, hydro, stable geothermal like the Te Huka Unit 3 expansion, and rapidly growing solar to meet historically high residential load while aggressively sidelining thermal generation. The trajectory toward a fully renewable electricity system is, I think, empirically supported by this quarter's performance.
While the 89.4% headline is truly commendable, I believe that deeper analysis reveals strategic fragility. The core driver was an environmental windfall, a factor that is outside of strategic control. We have to remain focused on the vulnerabilities, the orders of magnitude difference between hydro gains and baseload gains, the persistent, non-declining industrial fossil fuel use, and the demonstrated need for structural demand-side interventions, like the Methanex pause. These figures celebrate a strong operational performance, but they do not yet secure the long-term, weatherproof structural transition that's needed to truly eliminate fossil fuel dependence across the entire energy system.
This discussion really confirms the profound complexity inherent in achieving both energy independence and long-term stability in a modern economy. The data provides rich ground for analysis, demanding that we look beyond the headline figure.
Indeed. The difference between a single successful quarter and a repeatable, sustainable system is where the real policy work lies.
Thank you for illuminating those nuances